Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad Podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you for another episode, joining us for another episode. We're in our fourth season. We're continuing to have, the conversations that we've had already this year is out of this world. And, I've always said, I stopped saying it. I used to talk about it in the last season. But I always have to say it to myself because I'm always amazed by, the length of time that I have continued to do this. Because I remember when I started this podcast, I kept saying to myself that, I'm going to do this thing for 1 year, then I'm going to be done, and then I'm out. And here I am in year 4, and I'm still cranking at this thing and haven't slowed down. But one of the reasons that I have not slowed down is because of the guests that I've had on this podcast. Like, you talking about being inspired and being motivated, to continue in the calling work that we do. It has just been a wonderful experience, and I won't give that up. And so as long as I keep bringing on people that's inspiring me, I'm going to keep doing this show. Like our guest today, this brother here, Mann, is a true champion for fatherhood, mentorship, and community transformation. He is known as the National Encourager. Calvin has dedicated his life to shaping the destinies of boys and men, guiding them towards purpose, fulfillment, and success. As a father of 5, mentor, coach, podcast host, and community activist, he brings a wealth of experience and wisdom to the conversation. Through initiatives like EMIY, Encouraging Me, I'm Young, and his powerful interventions in schools, detention centers, and communities, Calvin is actively changing lives, one word of encouragement at a time. His work has earned him prestigious honors, including the Spirit of Detroit Award and the establishment of the EMIY National Respect Day in Michigan. Today, we explore his journey, his passion for fatherhood, and his lasting impact on his mission to uplift families and communities. Let's bring Dr. Mann to the stage. How you doing, sir?
Man, you just made a brother sound like he was really. I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. I'm glad to be in this space and
Man.
excited to get into this conversation.
Yeah, I'm just glad. I love this. Has been interesting, because I can't, as much as I want to get to everybody, I can't get to everybody. I was amazed at how many people I know. And I know people feeling some kind of way. You ain't call. I had somebody come up to me a couple of weeks ago. I'm trying to figure out what do I have to do to get on the I Am Dad podcast. And I'm like, look at it, I'm like, dude, you have no idea, the list that is accumulated, for me to get on. It's not that you're not worthy of being on. I'm moving in a certain way, and I move by the Spirit. Whatever the conversations, whatever God is putting in front of me, conversations that are necessary, that's how it's moving. And I'll eventually get to everybody, I guess, at some point. But man, thank you so much for being with us today. Listen, we start our podcast off in an interesting way. By you telling a little story that gives people some context about you. You could tell it however you want to tell it, because your story is your story is your story. Tell us your daddy's story.
I'm one of the guys that, first of all, my daddy's story is locked in legacy. My great grandfather, Alexander Miller, was the first pastor seen on television. My grandfather on my dad's side and my grandfather on my mom's side built a church together.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, Reverend Columbus Mann, was the first person signed by Motown as a gospel artist and has co-wrote several songs, including there is a discussion around Oh Happy Day, and my dad was the choir director for Oh Happy Day as well. My brother is a father, my uncle's fathers. So I come from a legacy of fatherhood in a way that community wise, I've had so many men that poured into me that I don't go nowhere and not talk about, including Jim Curry Sr., who gave me a whistle and I became the youngest varsity basketball coach at Ferndale High School at 23.
Wow.
So my daddy's story runs very, very deep.
Which explains why you're in the spaces you're in. But before I go there, I saw something else, and I just want to clarify because we can't go on in this podcast until we address this. You from the BK?
So no, I'm literally born and raised 8 Mile in Detroit.
Oh, what did I see? I saw something about Brooklyn. Something I don't know what I maybe I was looking at something else. I was like, wait a minute, let me find out this brother's from Brooklyn. But
No,
let's talk about the D, right?
yeah.
Because I know a lot of people. Listen, I went to Detroit. It's been some years ago. We used to do a initiative called the Ujima Journey,
Hmm.
and it was to take youth on a trip along the Underground Railroad.
Hmm.
And for years, we went south. And one year, because we're in New York State, right? Or I was in New York State, because the Underground Railroad obviously came north, but no one really talks about the Underground Railroad once it gets to the north. And so there's a strip of it that actually goes through New York up into Canada.
Hmm.
And so we decided one year that we was going to take the northern route and go there. But one of the places we stopped when we was going up that way before we went into Canada was Detroit. It was the first time I had ever been in Detroit. So you contrast somebody from New York City going into Detroit. So there's some similar vibes, right? There's
Right.
some things that I can like, okay, I'm feeling kind of familiar right here.
Yeah.
But then there's some other vibes, and it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, this is different. And so we were crossing the street. We were going to the Shrine of the Madonna
Uh-huh.
bookstore.
Yes, sir.
And we were bringing the kids across the street because it was like a big highway, a lot of cars going there.
Making noise in Davidson. Yes, sir.
And the kids are crossing the street, and the light changed. And people were like, burn, 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 get out of the street. I'm like, yo, it's like kids, like, relax. Like, people was rolling the window down, yelling, and I got on the other side, and I was like, yo, Detroit got a different energy. Like, it's kind of from New York. They ain't even feeling the kids. It's like, get out of my way. I'm trying to get to work, bro. Like, man, that was so funny, man. And so you say you grew up on the 8 Mile?
Yes, I grew up on 8 Mile and right there on Prairie. On my block was Bobo Brazil, the wrestler.
Oh,
We had a number of families. My parents at the time, while they were married, had two charter buses and would take families to Cedar Point and things like that. And my father had his groups, while he was making his albums and things like that. But yeah, 8 Mile, and and then I crossed over 8 Mile into Ferndale, Royal Oak Township, which is same thing, 8 Mile, and graduated from Ferndale High School.
wow. So what happened in your life that really encouraged you to begin to start looking at working specifically with boys and fathers?
So it was to the story goes, I played high school basketball and I had an opportunity, and that opportunity didn't manifest. So I had to
Mhm,
go to this Christian college with a friend.
mhm,
And we went to this Christian college, and I'm at the Christian college. Well, I had, at this point, no guidance. The men had, in my life, really kind of like let me down. And so when I got kicked out of Michigan Christian College, I stood in front of the college and said I was never going to tell a kid what was told to me. And
mhm.
so I come back to the community. I went through some life changing events. And one day, after walking out of a drug house, I went to see my godfather, which was Jim Curry Sr. I was 20 years old, and Mr. Curry gave me a whistle. When he walked me in, which was crazy, and I tell this story because Jim Curry was the one guy when we played high school basketball that would take us into St. Cecilia and Detroit to play against talent and things like that. Our own high school coach wasn't doing that. And
Mhm.
so during the summer, Jim Curry would have us playing with Oak Park High School, things like that. And Jim Curry was the one that gave me a job to help people get jobs. So Mr. Curry, I walk in, I say, man, I don't want to be in the streets. And he said, come on, young fella. That's how he used to talk. Come on, young fella.
Mhm.
And he took me in there and opened up this wooden cabinet that I've never seen him open. He pulls out a whistle, put the whistle around my neck, walks me in the gym. When he opens the door, it's a girls' team and a boys' team.
Mhm.
He said, now coach them.
Wow.
And that changed my life because that year I took the girls' team. We won gold medal, was in the newspaper, stuff like that. And so I discovered coaches clinics. So I
Mm.
started going to coaches clinics at 21 years old
Mhm.
and meeting these people like Bill Walton spent a whole 2, 3 hours with me showing me posts, moves, and games after speaking. Guy Lewis of Phi Slamma Jamma showed me out of bounds plays and spent time with me. This is my first year ever going to a coach's clinic. So
Mhm.
when I come back from the coach's clinic, I'm on something completely different because I discover what had been denied to me.
Mhm.
So these relationships with these coaches begin to get built, and that's how I really started getting into the game.
Yeah, there seems to be a uniqueness in the ability to be able to reach youth through sports. Do you think that it's much easier to get to them when you're coming through sports than any other way?
So I would say, yeah, but I chose a different path when I started with the boys, right? Because once I got out of coaching and I discovered that there was some areas with the young men that needed to be shaped. And
Mm.
so um when in 2006 a mom reached out to me and somebody had referred me to her and asked me to mentor her son off of video games. And
Mhm.
this is 2006, right? So I spent I think I showed up maybe 4 times. I know the fourth week I showed up, he had took off. And
Mm.
so she called me and started asking me because Encourage Me, I'm Young, Emmy was originally our apparel. I was just doing t-shirts, land shirts with kids was getting killed.
Mm.
Positive affirmations. God had poured into me all these affirmations. So I'm laying shirts with kids was getting killed all over the city, southeast of Michigan. And so she calls me, asks me a bunch of questions, and then she meets me and she said, hey, call this number. You're gonna need this. And she gives me the nonprofit, Encourage Me, I'm Young Inc. And so May 24th, 2007, I have a nonprofit and I have no idea what I'm doing.
Wow. Mhm. That is, and so one of the things when you created Emmy, talk to me first about Emmy before I ask you the second question.
So Emmy actually was birthed in a daycare. I couldn't understand why we called each other the N word when I was younger.
Okay.
And a young lady asked me to work in a daycare on my off days because as a barber, I had 2 off days, Mondays and Wednesdays. I was a barber. And I went and worked in this daycare, and God blew in the words, Encourage Me, I'm Young. I called my uncle, who I was associate head coach to on the varsity level because I had varsity girls,
Mhm.
and I told him this slogan. Well, we then started turning it over to kids. So our boys basketball team was warming up with these slogans would Encourage Me, I'm Young on the base.
Mhm.
I had no idea it was going to turn into this what you see today. Like I had no idea. So when I moved on from coaching and started dealing with my son and his athletic career, he was a football player, the whole nine, and a bunch of other kids. We were doing big time high level basketball. But when I was coaching this middle school, I kind of revised it. And then after that was over with, I just started trying to focus on the apparel. But then I had the nonprofit. Once the mother gave me the nonprofit, it shifted me. And so we were doing, uh, we had did a number of things. We did youth marches where we fed 300 families, things like that. We did scholarship fairs in partnership with another organization, Better Detroit Youth Movement, which I helped build.
Mhm.
Did We did a number of things, but encouraged me. I'm young, was there, but God had gave me this vision. So I wrote all this stuff down, man. Do you know I'm going through a divorce? That red book resurfaced and everything that was wrote in that book had taken place.
Wow.
So Emmy ended up on Ron's house. My t-shirts ended up on Ron's house, NFL Network, on Larry Foote, uh, Michigan State basketball. Like, we like to think we were the ones who started the affirmations on the back of shirts for the NCAA, because after Tom Izzo and them did it in 2009, it's like it exploded.
Right.
And they had used one of my quotes, which, man, I honestly can tell you, God just kept moving me in this direction. So Emmy, now we've had over, probably, my wife say, 16 to 18,000 males, 23, 24,000 youth since 2007.
Hmm. How do you differentiate the work that you do with boys and the work that you do specifically with fathers?
I kind of commingle. One thing that I discovered in 2014, we did a men's issue conference with Dr. Warren Farrell.
Okay.
And Dr. Warren Farrell, and it was another group led by Paul Elam, and they came to Michigan, Detroit, to do a men's issue conference. It was the first of its kind, and it was all about our issues. And they approached me because I've been print t-shirts, all of that, and a friend introduced them to me. We got into a conversation. They asked me to even speak, but I designed the shirts and everything. And at this event, these men issues, we discovered all these other things. That's when, right after that, Dr. Warren Farrell wrote a book called Boy Crisis.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I had a formula that I always used. Give me a father and give me a boy, and I'll take a broken father and put him in the space with a broken boy, and they both come up. Somehow the fathering piece becomes a valuable tool. So
Mhm.
then we locked in on, we only use fathers as mentors,
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because it takes 12 mentors to equal one father. The biological father is still the most powerful entity, but it
Mm.
takes 12 mentors to equal one father. And that fathering and that father figure and that fathering that we get on the kids is something that their environment doesn't get. So it literally changes, in our 14 weeks of mentoring, it literally changes the lives of both.
Mhm. Talk to me about that 12 to 1. Why is that? Why do you think you need 12 to 1?
Well, the 12, the reason why we use fathers is because the boy becomes a man, the man becomes a husband, and the husband becomes a father. Well, once you become a father, you're the closest thing to God.
Mhm.
In that scenario, there's a different essence in becoming a father. You and your friend, in one interview, was talking about how hard it is to transition. Some people don't get it, some people do when they have children.
Mm.
The reason why it's very hard, we discovered the reason why it's very hard for some men to recognize the transition into fatherhood is because it's not on their makeup.
Mm.
It's not. We carry the seed of life as men, and we have, the one thing that is true is we're very, very valuable, and I let no one take that away from me as a father.
Right,
The
right.
seed of life comes through me.
Mhm. Yeah, you said we were talking earlier before we came on with respect to Emmy. You've been doing it now for 18 years, you said.
Yep, Emmy nonprofit. This is our 18th year. Come May, we'll be 18 years old.
Talk to me a little bit about the struggles in operating that. What has been some of the challenges? Because you also said that you've kind of relaxed it in the last kind of month or so. What's going on with Emmy and what has been your challenges?
We've never been funded. So the work that we've done, we charge families, but we've never been funded. We've seen several models, we've seen several promises, we've heard it all. Um, we've never been funded to the point of capacity to be able to successfully do this work continuously. But what we've been able to do is, at one point, Ken. In 2010, I grabbed 350 boys on the east side of Detroit because they were picking up boys on writs to fill up the beds in juvenile.
Mm-hmm.
So I then continued that process. We had 15 weeks at this church, but we ran out of money. So our 14 weeks, in that 14 weeks, we seen huge transformations. One, our number one rule is you can't use the N word. So
Mm-hmm.
we saw huge transformation in communication. We
Mm-hmm.
never, still to this day, never had a fight in our mentoring program.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only at that time the 350, and then we followed that with 200 a couple of times. And as soon as we started asking for data, information, the parents, right, that shifted. We used the basketball to pull them into get the mentoring, right? But in that process, we're not even fully teaching basketball. We just use the ball to get the boys off of video games, get them out the house, the exercise proportion. And then in that 14 weeks, at the end of the 14 weeks, because we teach them a language, like our kids was learning the Arabic language. They have to do community service projects. Our boys, and this is 8 to 14. And
Mm-hmm.
literally, like right now, we got 100 boys age 3 to 7 on a waiting list doing a crowdfunding because I'm being convinced from a perspective that I don't think we value males enough.
Yeah, that's what I was going to lead into, which is what do you think is at the core that makes it so difficult to get funding for the work you do?
Well, media marginalization in the studies that they've shown, right? We've been marginalized through media more than anybody in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
so, besides the media marginalization, you got to take a look at how education. They put out a study where the teachers was watching the black boy more than they were watching any other kid.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that comes from media. If you're watching the news, if you see the movies, right? So we're constantly being vilified as the problem. And in single environments, single households, things like that, they miss their species. So if they don't have a Ken or if they don't have a Calvin, the dynamic for a young man to grow into things, our boys have to catch up. Whereas if everything is fair from the start, and we line up head to head, we're just as creative and fantastic and innovative as any other body in this world. We always chip away at his opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
so what we found that is if we grab them at 8 to 14 in prevention, when I drop them boys, when them boys hit high school, like I got one getting ready to go in high school, JoJo, he getting ready to go in high school. His story is horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But at 8, when his adopted mom brought him to us, JoJo now honor student, the whole nine, very mannerable, knows how to do things, leader, which is what
Mm-hmm.
we call our program, the future leaders. And he's going into high school, and involved in it. And I've had several athletes. I got athletes in college right now. They came through our mentoring program.
Mm-hmm.
But we teach the character. So we use 11 pillars to make sure you understand how important you are as a person. Because
Mm-hmm.
that character piece, that foundation, is so important to our young men to become men, husbands, and fathers.
Yeah. What is it in the work that you do that you believe flips the switch for youth? Because sometimes um, they come in apprehensive, distrustful, um, impatient, and you have to find a way to understand all of that and still get through to them. Like, what is it for you that allows you to be able to get through to them?
Um, Honestly, it was my experiences
Mm,
that allowed me to craft more experiences for them. So, to be honest with you, God, most definitely, they get that immediately. The other thing is love. I love on these kids. Like they don't. This is why I use fathers, because a father has the patience of understanding how to build a young man, and we're not in a hurry to tear him down. We're not in a hurry. Healthy fatherhood is the answer to the community, period. But we're not in a position, we put ourselves in rather in a position to assist a young man to prevent him, as one of my mentors would say, we want to alleviate you having 20 years of unnecessary issues, right?
Mhm.
And so the mentoring is such an important piece, especially coming from a father, that you're able to put in them what they're not receiving in the home, right? And
Mhm.
some of these guys have dads. And so even during our mentoring program, we do this thing in our mentoring program, which I think is sweet, right?
Mhm.
It's boss sessions. We do boss sessions where we bring the mothers in and teach them how to stop doing everything for the boy,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Allow him, right? These are things you should be teaching your son, 8, 9. You and I had to cook early. I don't understand how a boy 10 years old can't go scramble eggs and make breakfast for his mama for Mother's Day. That just blows my mind that we
Yeah.
do so much for them that they become codependent
Mhm.
on the mothering. So we teach the mothers that we do bring mothers have to do take blood pressure every time they come. So we bring some self care to the moms. We bring the fathers, and the thing that we were getting ready to do in this session for the this spring session was the fathers were going to have to start coming in every other opposite Mondays of the mothers, where we can pour more into them. The problem is gaining access to the fathers, right? Because so many fathers are detached
Mhm.
from the emotion. When a father's not in range of his kid, it's hard for him to be attached to
Mhm.
the kid emotionally, physically, emotionally. When you're too far away, if you get every other weekend, you and I know every other weekend is not quality time for a father. And
Mhm.
so we try to bring them into the space and allow them to tell and share stories uh, to the kids, and all the kids have questions with the men because that's their species.
Mm. What do you think is the need? What do they come in needing? Like, what do you self-identify before they even tell you that they need X? Do you already identify like this kid needs this?
Well, personally, I think we parents wait too long to get mentoring.
Mm.
I think we wait too long. Mentoring is just as important as a kid going to get for you paying for basketball skills or football skills or training. Mentoring is that important, especially quality mentoring.
Mhm.
But what I think is really the key to that is, right. It's what, Ken. It's just tough for some of us sometimes, right?
Mhm.
And that is part of the dynamic that goes with that. I just think it's tough for some of us sometimes.
Yeah, I love what you're doing. We've at Fathers Incorporated has we haven't had a challenge. I'm just very mission focused, and I don't drift when it comes to what God has put in me to do, which is clearly to strengthen fathers, right? And
Yeah,
so I often have to be very vocal about separating ourselves from mentorship. And I always say Fathers Incorporated is not a mentorship agency. That's not
right.
what we do. We work specifically with fathers because I believe that if I can strengthen a father, there will be no need for this kind of mentoring. We're always going to need mentoring for something in
It's
life,
something, right?
but we are not going to be in the business of trying to replace fathers. That is never, ever going to happen. It's
Never,
impossible to happen. And so,
never.
but if I can strengthen fathers to be the natural mentors they're meant to be, then it'd be less need for mentorship agencies to play that role. You could play other roles because kids are going to need professional mentors. They're going to
Yeah,
need specific mentors. They're
yes.
going to need, right? We all need mentors in our life, but this whole notion that we have to create agencies to replace fathers or compensate for the absence of fathers is drives me absolutely crazy.
It
When
it's crazy because what you're instilling really is discipline. It's the same thing when a kid comes to us. That's the
right.
first area we start is the discipline. We know the exercise. What you know by teaching and showing these men these things, cognitively they're improving. We use exercise. We challenge them. They have to do so many sit-ups and push-ups. So those disciplines that you're pouring into their foundation you're absolutely right. It allows them now you can go and teach the village. It's recreating, and that's what our work really is about, restoration of family.
Mhm.
You're doing it through the father. We've done it we've done when it comes to dads, um, my good father's only a component which was under our which was under Emmy, we did 11 straight years of fatherhood celebration walks in the Labor Day parade. So that was
Mm.
the same time, Philip Jackson was the guy.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, for
Mhm,
Million Fathers March. So in 2008, we jumped in the Million Fathers March, right?
mhm.
But from that point on, we did 11 straight. We called it Father Celebration
Mhm.
Walks. And we then escalated to the whole family. So we were getting in with the UAW during Labor Day and shouting how important fathers really were.
Yeah, it's one
Yeah.
of my most important pieces of work when we, I'll never forget going me, David Miller, Sean Dove, Steve Vassell, went to Chicago to meet with Philip Jackson. This is when his health was failing, when he had just come out the hospital again. And we decided that, we were just going to go up there and, pour some love on him, see what he needed. And we were sitting there talking, and he said, Kenny, he's like, one of my biggest fears is that, all the work that I've done, for the city of Chicago and around the country is going to fade, and it's not going to
Oh, word.
um, go. And he said, man, you've been with me since day one, when I called you about the Million Fathers March. And I said, absolutely. It was a no brainer. He was like, we're going to do this. And he says, would you consider like taking that on as Fathers Incorporated so that it can continue to go? And I was like, what? He's like, yeah. He says, I think that he says, the spirit, where it came from, what it's trying to do. And I was like, you know what? Absolutely. I don't want to have to think about that right now because you're
Right.
here. Let's not talk about that.
Right.
But in the occurrence that happens, yeah, we'll take it
Man,
on. And
the
so,
world. That
yeah,
brother was touching the world.
yeah,
Billion
he was.
fathers.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to get it back to, though a lot of things have happened since we've had it, COVID happened, a couple of other things, and it's getting back to that space. But this year we're actually the theme, we change the theme every 2 years, but the theme this year, next year is going to be civic engagement, and getting schools to understand the importance of connecting fathers with their children and engaging in civic activity, whether that
Yes.
is joining the PTA, voter registration, volunteering, mentoring, coaching,
Yes.
school crossing guard, mystery readers, whatever it takes, that the schools should be encouraging that kind of interaction between fathers and their children in the schools. Is just a beautiful way, to do that. And so, yeah, the Million Fathers March has just been a cool thing to do, and I'm trying to get it back to like really embedded in the educational system around the country, so that fatherhood engagement becomes at the forefront of how schools are thinking about creating an environment where our children can succeed.
Yeah, especially because school starts for different schools and counties across the country anyway.
Hmm.
So it's at that time you should most definitely be involved. It's funny that uh, we have this conversation because that engagement, that fatherhood piece, is the same thing I was talking to your guy Jeffrey Johnson about.
Hmm.
Right. So
Hmm.
so Dr. Jeff, man, 27 years.
Hmm.
I get to go speak at his event this year. But
Hmm.
27 years, and I was just talking to him about the same thing, about the discipline for us in this fatherhood space to make those things happen. So that
Hmm.
Million Fathers March, like Philip Jackson he was banging that boy
Hmm.
very, very hard for years, right?
Hmm.
And I remember a conversation, and I see a lot of us are in these spaces, man. And so I had this vision, and I share this with you, Ken. One of the goals that I had for Good Fathers Only was to create a fatherhood union.
Wow. Yeah, 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 yeah. I hear you.
That was the goal. Why? Because across the country, where do men really go when they first become a father?
Barbershop. I'm just joking, but yeah, I know
But
it's
yeah,
not true, but
it's not really there. So a fatherhood resource center in 50 states where we are all linked, the resources and everything would be.
man, you need to do that, bro. That thing
I'm not,
just puts
it's just hard
chills.
to get,
I know. I
you know
know.
what I mean?
Yeah.
But if we can, if that's a conversation that we're having, if we can get those, we can line up those resources across the country And like, because we were close this year to almost last year, where someone's going to donate a space to us,
Mm-hmm.
and they reneged on the opportunity for us to actually build this fatherhood resource center. Now, had we had that space, we would have created the first fatherhood resource center, so first time fathers would have a place that they could go
Yeah.
and get all these resources. So your stuff would be in there, all the men, the resources across the country, so you could get film,
Mm-hmm.
movies. You can get all the things that you need to understand how important your fatherhood really is.
Yeah, it's kind of what we're doing now. I created this virtual space now that we're building on. It's going to get bigger as I continue to kind of pour into it. We created this virtual platform called Papa University, and
Yeah.
we're just kind of loading it up with just stuff, fun stuff and serious stuff, but there's so much more to do with it because to your point, like where do we go, and we can say that we go some things like, we manage the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, and so it is one place you can go, but it's not an all access place, right? It's not, you know the clearinghouse is focused on three different areas of work, and that's the work of practitioners, the work of researchers, and then fathers themselves. But we do so much work around trying to inform practitioners and researchers that we don't really get to the fatherhood stuff. And fathers, as well as we know, they have a bit of an apprehension about anything that is government, and so it works to a certain extent, but dudes ain't gonna line up to be rolling into anything federal because of the fear and history of what the federal government has meant to men,
Mhm.
specifically black men, and men of color.
Right.
And so when you think about the work that you're doing, like what sits in your fire every night that it's like, man, I gotta make this happen. This has gotta happen. What keeps you up at night?
Well, it has been all the work, right? It's the one thing that's really keeping me up right now. I'm on this year. I'm dropping my next book, All Ingredients Count, which
Mm,
will be my eighth book. And I'm working on another children's book from a cast off from the other two. But for me, it's bringing the people together,
mm,
right? We restoring families. Like, I don't know if you saw Fraser's conversation about we only 30 some percent as black family, the whole nine,
mhm,
two parent households, things like that. For me, it's restoring families, and we've done that. We've
mhm,
we've put families back together, right? We've
mhm,
kept families together through the boy, and so it's just trying to. For me, it's been trying to figure out who's looking for us to invest in us so we can multiply this work, because we literally have a 10-city plan that's on our website, right? The 10 cities most marginalized and understood. And we don't try to really get into the word marginalized because we call it boys of promise, right?
mhm,
So these are boys who are not even invested in. And
mhm,
so if you're not even investing in the work that we do, you're really a contributor to where they're going and their decisions, because if a boy doesn't have a father, it's going to be very difficult for him to become a man.
mhm,
And then once he becomes a man, if he doesn't have a father, it's going to be very difficult for him to become a husband. And 65%, what is it? 63% of black males don't even have children. So
mhm,
we're not even procreating
mhm,
children and to sustain. So our culture, when has it grown? Right? Since the
mhm,
60s, when has the black culture actually really grown? With
mhm,
all the production and all the greatness that we've brought to this world, the American, uh, African American, or Negro, whatever you want to call us, right? At this
mhm,
point, we are not having healthy babies, but we're contributing to these systems. So the foster care, the the system, poverty system, the prison system, when we don't have proper guidance. So
mhm,
the male, again, the seed carrier, it kind of lines up with everybody saying that that was the target. So if you starve it out, it will only produce this much. So how do you have competition in other areas and cultures and things like that when you're being manipulated and starved out? So for us, it's the boy anyway. And in this country, all boys are in trouble. From
Hmm.
suicide, we do the Smash Suicide campaign because boys 5 to 11 are number one, right? And these are the things that is happening to the boy. So for us and our work, that's the thing that really keeps me up and just learning more and more. One of the things that I really love, and I think you know about this, is Dr. Yak Pangsek. I don't know if you know his study.
Yeah, no, I don't know his.
So Dr. Yak Pangsek did a study. He was the person that mic'd up a cage with the male rat and its sibling and its children, and you
Mm,
can hear the children laugh. So Pangsep discovered through his research that as fathers we parent different. So fatherhood and play is actually good for the cognitive uh, of our children. So how
mhm,
our children's brains can grow and things like that. So
mhm,
we're literally killing children from the absence of fathers. So
mhm,
this is another reason. Those are the things that really keep me up in the research. Me and my wife are constantly researching and coming across new information, including when a child doesn't have their father from birth to nine, they don't live long, right?
mhm.
There's a telomere study. The telomeres is the cap at the end of the DNA, and it says when a child doesn't have their father, when a child has their father from birth to nine, the child lives longer. When a child doesn't have a father, the DNA code, the telomeres is open, is
Mm,
closed when the father's involved.
mhm.
So you can see where a lot of our people die young, literally, is traced back to the absence of fathers.
Wow. How does this work translate into you being a father?
Ah, well, because I come from so much, I'm a big family. It's 8 boys, 2 girls. Because of my older brothers and my older sister shaping, challenging, beating me up, all those things.
Rites
Um,
of passage.
rites of passage, right? Um, family is something that we are very, very near and dear about. And we all got out here. I was talking to my cousins, right? Because us is linked, is Mann, Morgans, and McNeil's. There's 3 M's, right?
Mhm,
The house that my mother's mother and father had is still in the family. 11 children was born in that house. Out of that home came 216 or more bodies. We're still producing children. And that house is it. My brother owns that house. So when we talk about what fatherhood and family is, we just naturally are there. Like we
mhm,
just do it. You know what I mean? I with my children, it's a different type of narrative because I'm a father that challenges you to go out into the world. I'm not the father that holds your hand and wants you to always report to me. And I'm not that father. I'm the father like you got a responsibility out here. Go make it happen. You gifted. It's in you. Go. This is what we come from.
mhm,
And so I, prepare my kids to take on the world. I've had some instances in my life where, I wasn't the greatest father, right? I was a part-time father. I was a father that, and then eventually I got my oldest son. My second son, I didn't really get till he was 18.
mhm.
My last 2 children, right? My son and my daughter, and then my stepson. We are all linked, right? And then the village around my children. So family is everything to me, right? So fatherhood is, I like I said, we really swag fatherhood big time, like and people like, how do you even act like this? Because I remember my son asked me like, what makes you think you're a good father?
He asked you that.
Yeah, yeah. You know,
What was your response?
I said, because I am. Like, I don't need necessarily your approval to say that I'm a good father. I did my job. You here, you graduated from college. You might want me to do a little bit more. You want me to be a little more emotional. You want me to be, but when you went off to college, was you ready? And he was like, yeah, that was my job. And I'm
Right.
here. My wisdom is always here for you to call and get. I'm always here. And so that's what my kids do. But when it comes to mentees and things like that, they always have access. All my mentees have access. They want to call, they call. White, black, Arabic, whatever they are. Coach, I answer.
Mm. We are now in the midst of an administration that is going to place a heavy emphasis on marriage, where they believe, and it's not only. I always start off by saying they believe. It's actually true, but the process is where the challenge is, in that our children fare better, or children fare better when they are raised in a two-parent married household. All the research says bears that to be absolutely 1000% true. The challenge for me always is the path to which we get there, right? Because I have often said that marriage is a journey, not a destination. And the way that people kind of look at it sometimes is, if we can get people married, our children will fare better, right? But then the question is, what's the journey to becoming married? Because it's the journey part of it that makes the married situation a great space for children to be raised in. It's not just the mere fact of someone getting married, right? Because if I just met a young lady today, have never seen great model of marriage, and just decided this, I just love her right now, let's get married. That's not the best situation for my child, because I don't understand what marriage means and the commitment to marriage. When you think about your work and you think about the parents that you're dealing with, how are you, if in any way you've thought about it, how are you going to begin to start looking at what relationships look like, whether they're married, co-parenting, cohabiting, any of those things? Does it ever play in your mind that you have to begin to start thinking about that?
So we actually, one of the things I want to extend an invite to you to come on our podcast is called "Put Your Family First." So
Hmm.
that's one thing. We did a series around how important marriage is
Mm.
on our podcast, right? We get into the conversation about why is marriage, how you live longer, those things. For the culture, right, which is the extreme opposite of what we're procreating in. See, it's the irresponsibility of sex that is harming families, right? We're
Mm.
kind of irresponsible, and then a child shows up, and now the child is in a divisional situation if you're not in a marriage. It's how we make our children, right? And so there's a difference when I'm making love versus me having sex and having a child,
Mm.
because
Mhm.
the child's makeup is of love. There's
Mhm.
a difference when it's a two-parent household. The kids are not as emotional, whereas in those other households, they're very emotional, overreactive, and have issues, tons of issues, because what is the biggest missing component when a child is born in our culture? The father. So the father brings a certain amount of essence to the womb while the child is in the womb, to the cognitive presence of the child while the child is. Research shows a number of things are present it to the woman's body. Infant mortality is not. So we have to bring a certain amount of peace into marriage. And
Mhm.
then for those who are going into marriage, women and men need to understand what it means to be a pilot and a co-pilot. I did a whole workshop with women, and the understanding that as a co-pilot, you know everything about this plane. You know what's going on. As a pilot, I know I'm supposed to get us to the destination.
Mhm.
Now, if there's some turbulence on this plane and I can't see it, the co-pilot is supposed to be able to let me know where these issues are. When we get into these relationships, we don't have co-pilot skills, so we don't know how to make the pilot feel good about flying the plane. So
Mm.
as we move forward, we've done tons of investment in what women need and what they require and where they must go and how it's supposed to be. I'm talking about the magazines, the media has told women they better off by themselves and things like that. And then infant mortality is through the roof. So when it comes to marriage, I think the biggest thing that is not taught, and I told my brother this, who's a pastor, and I've said this to several pastors, when you bring a family in to go through their session to learn about marriage and what you're supposed to do, you have to go to Numbers 30 and teach them about the vow. We are not teaching people about the vow.
Mm.
In Numbers 30, which was our campaign for Good Fathers Only, everything a man must do, he must do the things that come out of his mouth. But then there's more about the vow and what the woman must understand and how it goes, right? And so those things are connected to our value. So I
Mhm.
can look forward. When I come home, what brings me home? Women don't understand. Do you take your man's hand and pray for him? That's protection. You're required to protect me as well. But if you don't know to take my hand and pray for me when I go out into this world, you're opening me up to all these other things. So
Mm.
you would have the speculation based upon all the shows you watch, all the media that you read, where all this deception is. You would have speculation that when I walk out the door, I'm cheating because that's what you're feeding. But if
Mm.
you take my hand as a wife and pray for me, daily. Sometimes you got to take because you know as well as I know. Sometimes, man, we going through it, and
Mhm.
and you as a wife might not even understand that. But the most powerful thing you can do is take my hand and pray for me. If
Mm.
you add that into your co-piloting skills, more than likely, I'm coming home because that's not out in the world. But
Right.
if the world is in my home and the world is outside, it's easy for somebody to pull me out of my home. And I think we need to understand the importance that protection is just not a man's job. It is a woman's job to protect her husband through prayer, deeds, and actions as well.
Yeah, you know where you're going is a whole nother podcast conversation that we probably have to come back and do at some point. Because one of the other elements that, we're fighting up against that also has to be addressed is this whole notion, that the culture is priming women to believe that men aren't necessary. And so we are in this culture now that, as opposed to working together for a common good of our children, we always trying to one up each other.
Yeah, money
Um,
over God.
yeah. And so when you see that, do you see that play? It's interesting because you're in the mentoring space.
Yeah,
And it's kind of ironic in the sense that on one hand, you don't see the value and the essentialness of fathers, but now that you are without, you have this desire for mentoring, which includes a man and a father. So on one side, you think he's not necessary, but somehow along the way, your children remind you that yes, he is. And then you have to start seeking that to see that balance. Do you see that play itself out in your
yeah,
mentoring?
yes. We parent different. There was a nanny who told her own daughter, if you get in the way of how a father fathers, you're going to always have to get in the way, which means the school is going to call you. You always got to go to the school, which means the kid is going to call you. You always have to do. So then you fall, and that is destructive to the kid, right? Allowing men to be fathers to their children and understanding that we parent different is so needed in the structure, and then the fact that this is my seed. So I'm an advocate for DNA testing at birth because a man knows his seed, so he knows how to what cultivate his seed.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is mine. I know who he is. Allow me to cultivate because you're not a boy. I have to get him to manhood. Once I get him to manhood, I got to prepare him to how it takes to be a husband. All of that is in the home and is the example that is truly needed. And too many of us, we've allowed the system to separate us in two different economies. It's her economy and his economy, and they're eating off the very best that we have to offer. And that is what has to change for us to understand that in the 50s and 60s, men took women who were just average women. She didn't have to have a degree.
Mm.
Now, all of a sudden, a man has to be uh, Don Julio and all these other people,
Mm-hmm.
to enter a relationship. But I find another component to that is we mask our women and men are masking to be things that they're really not. So we would have long eyelashes. We're not in our natural hair state. We don't, we would have put on the word is called makeup.
Mm-hmm.
Natural beauty, who we are, because the coldest thing about us, Ken, is our melanin.
Right.
Everybody wants some. They just can't get it.
Yeah, the other thing that they're masking for are things that aren't necessary,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so to raise children, those things that you talked about, which is external degrees, car, house, they're nice in some supportive way, but that's not the core necessity of being a great parent, right? So part of what we have to begin to start talking about, this is kind of where I'm leaning in my work a little bit, where there is some connection to marriage, but I think there's a more important connection, and that is, I believe that if you strengthen couples, let's just say they're not married at birth, but if you strengthen couples to be better co-parents, that along the way they might find out that we should probably get married. But it's not going to happen the opposite way,
No.
because even if they don't get married, if you cultivate the co-parenting relationship, they are going to then be more likely to remain co-parent, to remain in a solid, healthy, consistent co-parenting relationship, regardless of their romantic connections.
Oh no, I agree. I love the co-parenting model.
Right.
I think the co-parenting model is a very powerful model, especially in the fixing area, to assure that the kids get that. Co-parenting is most definitely a solution in a number of these areas. But how do you make co-parenting again? As I've instructed men, as we've done in a number of sessions with men, um, even in workshops, how do you use the same tools that you did to get her to use the same tools to gain access to your children,
Mm,
right? And so, in co-parenting means patience. Co-parenting means you can't you can't dip back in. We have too much of that. As soon as we split up, we go back and forth, and now I dip back. She's gonna catch emotions every time you go back over there. So
mm,
now you dipping back in, you're taking time away from the child. At this point, if we're gonna co-parent, our whole sole focus, which we should have did when we were together, is to focus on the children and
right.
prepare them for the opportunities as we prepare for after they become adults. It's just that simple, but you have to have the proper communication skills, and that's where literacy is a problem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I don't how do I you we you argue completely different than I do because I don't understand half the things that you're saying.
Mhm.
Whereas you're using these big words to articulate just to say I don't like you, but you're using a big word. I don't get that, right? And so I'm frustrated, and that's where it goes all the way back to the very same things. Co-parenting is going to require a considerable amount of training and tools, as you say, to make sure that the kids get both parents because kids need both parents, and that's our motto at Good Fathers Only. With the men, kids need both parents, so you got to fight to get back in. That's what you have to do, but
Mhm.
you got to have a strategic plan on fighting, and then you can never break that again. And I got proof. There's several families that watched me co-parent, where it's
Mhm.
a village. And some people thought, I was practicing polygamy, but my village was
Right,
together, right?
right,
The mother and my wife, and we all and the kids in that environment, right?
right.
Was locked and stocked. So, and there's still relationships after because I divorced at she asked for a divorce after 20 years. So in that process, that my village is still intact. They still all collaborate, work together, the whole nine. And I'm just the one that's on the outside that they call, right?
Mhm.
My current wife, she does work with women that is amazing, and so we are in purpose and in work, and we do this work right because she was restoring families that been through some things herself,
Mhm.
and so it's a blessing to understand that co-parenting is most definitely a viable tool that we should be mastering personally.
Wow. Dr. Mann, it's been a pleasure. Listen, tell people how to get in touch with you and how they can support Emmy.
So you can support us at Emmy World EMIYworld.com. We most definitely could use the support, and you can reach me at calvintman.com. I'm looking to speak and share some of these tools with fathers and people, and bring our people together, bring the country together, bring families together, I think that's what I was born to do, and bringing people together is something that I'm starting to get better at.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to share your work, your experience, and insight with our I Am Dad podcast listeners and to our listeners. Thank you for joining us again. You know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor Art Mitchell always said to me, Kenny, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Till next Sunday, God bless and peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am Dad, period.